So last year, like many of you, I got really into Dune. At PAX East 2024, me and a couple of the Sky Oblivion devs saw Dune Part 2 in theaters, and yeah, I was hooked. Just in that month, I saw the movie 6 more times and even bought the book, 2 things which I basically never do. So when Funcom reached out to sponsor a video about Dune Awakening, that was one of the easiest yeses I have ever given, because Dune Awakening completely shocked me. It's an open world survival Dune MMO from the people who made Conan Exiles. But what this game gets so incredibly correct is it actually feels like Dune. The desert is consistently terrifying. You'll be running for your life from sandworms, all the while getting a deeper spice connection with the Fremen. You spend hours worried about hydration and looking for proper water sources, and it even has some pretty fun sword fighting gameplay, all based around shield usage and slowly piercing shields. If you love Dune, I really think this is going to be a game for you. And if you want, you could even try it for yourself in just a couple of weeks. On May 9th, Dune Awakening is having an Act 1 story beta weekend, and you can sign up for this right now. And the game will even be at PAX East, along with me, that same weekend on May 9th, with Funcom giving out thousands of game keys during their stream, so make sure to stay tuned for that. Because the game isn't even that far away anymore. It's dropping in just a couple of months on June 10th, but if you are familiar with Dune, like many of us I'm sure are after watching Part 2 and then kind of falling in love with the franchise, things in Dune Awakening are actually going to be a bit different now. Timmy isn't here anymore. In this story, Lady Jessica abided by the Bene Gesserit wishes and birthed a daughter instead. So now we are sent to Arrakis on a personal mission from the Reverend Mother to uncover the Fremen. They recently have gone missing and we have to find out what's going on there. But that sort of goes wrong and we end up crash landing alone in the desert, and this is where the game is going to blow a lot of you away. I spent a good 10 to 20 hours exploring this desert, and to be clear, all of this is still in beta. And if you are worried about that MMO aspect, I played almost entirely solo and still had a blast with this game, so don't worry about the online components. This is definitely a game you could play solo, but even right from the very start of this one, your survival needs will need to be addressed. Just like the Dune series, you start off here in the middle of the desert struggling to survive. But what honestly became my favorite aspect of Dune Awakening was the gamification of desert survival. Water has a giant bar on your screen, and in the early game, you will be fighting to stay hydrated. Spend too long in the sun and you're going to rapidly drop in hydration, which will give your character major debuffs. So you'll be constantly scavenging around for water sources, whether that be these plants that you can use, or more importantly, blood from fallen enemies that you can extract and convert to water at your base. The Fremen are all over this world, and a huge part of your early game is going to be fighting them, but also just exploring certain locations and even Fremen bases, because Fremen have these moisture-sealed interiors that you'd find out in some of the mountains around Dune, and they act as one of the best caches for resources or even water in your early game. Just like in the books and movies, water here is a vital resource that you have to constantly make sure you have. And in the early parts of this game, you'll spend a ton of time just dehydrated. You will not be able to find enough water, and even just getting around the deserts of Arrakis is pretty terrifying most of the time. When the sun comes out, you have to hide or play around the shadows. And yeah, there are sandworms here, and they manage to be just as scary as you'd imagine. Crossing the open desert will alert sandworms to your location. You have this bar on screen that reflects how close they are, and basically what happens is, as a sandworm breaches nearby, you'll be alerted to that and you'll see them start chasing after you. Some areas of the desert are even more sensitive and will alert sandworms even faster. And when sandworms breach, you'll really notice this. They're loud and inevitable. They feel like these massive forces coming at you that you really have no control over. And even after 10 hours in this game, once I was approaching the mid-game, had better gear and even a vehicle, I was still running for my life from these sandworms. At no point were they not terrifying. Part of this is the really cool gamification that if you die to a sandworm, you lose everything on you, while typical death allows you to keep many of your items. For the entirety of my time in Dune Awakening, I was planning routes to spend the least amount of time out in the open, basically studying the map and gauging if I had enough time to cross that area. And if all of that wasn't enough, there are even these patrolling Chom ships that will lock onto you and suspend you as they have enemies raining down to take you out for being in their spice fields. Yeah, the desert in Dune Awakening is truly threatening in many unique ways. At its core, these early hours of Dune Awakening will be gathering various kinds of resources to craft those core items you need and eventually build up a base of your own. And although I didn't dive super deeply into it, this game does have a very extensive base builder that you can easily dump tons of hours into. And as you are exploring the desert, you of course can stumble upon all kinds of other bases built by other players. And while a lot of survival games out there do have this similar loop of crafting and gathering a ton of resources in the early game, Dune Awakening really does change it up thanks to those uniquely Dune threats that you're going to find in the desert. Having to play around hydration and worms really elevated the challenge and fear in this game. I always felt uncomfortable in the desert when I was out in the elements. And yeah, there are even sandstorms here, which are brutal. This is one of those games where when I heard a sandstorm was coming, I would just beeline it back to my base because those were such a threat and could kill you almost instantly. But once you do have some of the basics together, you do have a base of your own, the game can really start to come together. Research and crafting are major gameplay components, and this too is gamified in a cool way. A lot of the early research is going to give you some of those basic supplies. These are going to be largely broken down into two categories though. There's going to be general scavenger or spacer gear, things that people in this universe just have access to, that is advanced technology compared to what we're used to. But then separately, there's going to be more Fremen specific technology that you need to rely on the Fremen to gain access to. So over time, you do build up and can create your own things like weapons, armors, and even craft your own vehicles, which really opens up the map. I didn't have access to it in this beta build, but in the full game, there are ornithopters, which just seems like it'll be epic to explore around with a friend or two. But one of the coolest parts about this was that Fremen tech. The way this works is you'll have to go to these Fremen bases to find specific components that only they have access to because we don't know how to make them. So you have to basically find the raw resources to craft some of these Fremen items. And Fremen bases often had some of the best gear in the game. Sometimes you would just find some of those Fremen unique items, things that you could craft, but you can get an earlier version just by finding it on a Fremen body, but also things like schematics that give you the ability to create a unique variant of a certain item that typically only the Fremen would have access to. The loot variation was pretty rewarding. At one point I even found a fully functional vehicle at one of these bases that I could just take for myself and drive around in. So all of this does feel super Dune. The Fremen are this mysterious faction that are hiding up in the mountains of Arrakis, and over time you can unlock some of their secrets and abilities as you gradually peel back the layers of that faction. Like to create that first still suit, which honestly is a huge gameplay moment, you finally feel like you could actually survive in the desert, but first you have to get a bunch of special Fremen crafting components that you could only find by going into Fremen bases and fighting them. Early on, the Fremen will just attack you on sight, but as you go further into the game, you can become closer to these peoples, and this is done in a really cool way. Over time, you'll find Fremen trials where you basically go in and breathe in some spice to go into a transcendent state. This would lead you into a spice dream of sorts, where you'd find out more about the history of the Fremen while completing some type of mini game in it. These often being very philosophical and even showing some of the struggles that the Fremen have had to go through already, how they got to this situation they're currently in, but also often leaving you with a special new Fremen-based ability in the end. You are literally becoming more Fremen and getting awakened by the spice as you do this. And by the mid-game, you can activate a special spice awakened combat state and can even consume spice-based food for bonuses to that. But of course, there are other factions in this world, as well as a story happening all around you. There's going to be a variety of quests to complete and even contracts for other houses, like House Harkonnen and Atreides. But some lesser houses are also featured and found at trade hubs with their own stories to tell. The open world here is very extensive. There are a ton of relics all throughout this one, so you're going to be spending plenty of time clearing through old research stations and uncovering the backstory of what used to be going on Arrakis, or even just doing story quests with other members of the Fremen as you do progress things forward. And you will have to make certain choices around all of this, with opportunities to get closer to certain great houses, but you have options around that. Like during one of these moments in the early game, I was able to betray House Atreides in order to get a big leg up with the Harkonnens. And the combat here can be incredibly enjoyable. Combat's going to be heavily based on how you built out your character. In the early game, you're going to have to answer a variety of questions, which will kind of put you down a certain path and a certain build. But there are multiple trees available here, and as you do get into the open world, there are opportunities to unlock access to other ones based off who you interact with. I was largely going for a trooper build. I had access to things like a grappling hook that became invaluable with traversal. Dune Awakening has a real surprising amount of verticality. Like, yeah, you see them doing it in the movies trees going up and down to places, but actually having to climb those towers is a pretty interesting element of gameplay. But beyond that, I had access to other abilities like anti-gravity grenades, hunter seekers, and even just general grenades. And combat is going to dramatically change based off whether you're using a shield or not. Early on, you just won't have access to a shield, so things are pretty straightforward and simple. I was mostly using ranged weapons, but melee is also an option. That's kind of what you'd expect from a survival game, shooting down enemies and fairly basic combat. But as you do get further into the desert and level up your own character, shielded enemies will start appearing, which really changes things up in an interesting way. As you approach the mid-game of Dune Awakening, you're going to unlock access to a lot of the cooler Dune elements, like suspenders and shields. You'll have to create your own personal power pack to utilize this stuff, but otherwise suspenders can help prevent falls or even fly to a degree once you get higher tier variants, and your shield can be activated to block the majority of damage from incoming ranged attacks. And I found the shield combat to be a lot more fun and just a lot more engaging. When using a shield yourself, you really have to rely on melee, and when you come up against shielded enemies, you have to use a long press to slow your attack to pierce that enemy's shield. So this makes combat more reactionary and combat-based when it's shield on shield. Timing a good block would parry and briefly stun that enemy, giving you the perfect window to pierce their shield and basically one-shot kill them. So it almost becomes this different back and forth, where you're trying to get that good parry, but then it's almost an instant kill if you get the timing right. And I found shield combat here just to be a lot more engaging compared to other combat. It has this level of depth that most other MMOs simply don't feature and does provide a nice alternative to just gun-heavy combat. You can still rely mostly on guns if you want to. You'll unlock better guns as you progress in this game, or even do a hybrid. Use some guns, then activate your shield at appropriate moments to go hand to hand or just really slow things down. But overall, I just really love my time with Dune Awakening. That is saying a lot considering some of the coolest aspects of this game weren't even available to me. I played a beta build that was in the early to mid game. Once you get to the late game, some serious things open up, like the deep desert that has open PvP with greater environmental threats, and even the Lands Rat, where players are going to fight for factional control over certain locations, then it will dynamically change. At its core, Dune Awakening is a survival game. You're thrust into the desert and have to build up yourself to survive. But the gamification of the desert or really Dune-themed survival mechanics elevates this experience into something special that I think separates it from a lot of the other survival games out there. And if you're into Dune, I just think this game is going to work for you. A lot of the gameplay mechanics are really well implemented, so you just organically play in a similar way to how they act in the movies, which I personally found to be a ton of fun. So genuinely, thank you to Dune Awakening for sponsoring this video, and if you like what you saw, you could use my link down below to pre-order the game for yourself, debuting on June 10th, but if you pick up the deluxe edition, you can get 5 days early access on June 5th.